Good morning, everyone. How are you? This is Mr. Goto, your host, your instructor for American History 1. I need to adjust this microphone. Give me 1 second. Let's see. Bring it down just a little bit. Okay, so it's not so loud. All right, so today we're going to talk about Manifest Destiny, the westward expansion of the United States. It appeared that it was God's mission, or it was the mission of the Founding Fathers, to have some particular type of westward expansion because the country was getting larger with immigration and population exploding after the War of 1812 and before the War of 1812. And like I said, the country was expanding. So they had this thing called Manifest Destiny. Manifest Destiny was a phrase created in the 1840s by an American journalist. It was used to justify American westward expansion into areas such as Texas, Oregon, and California. Manifest Destiny refers to the widely held belief that the United States system is better than any other, best government, best economy, etc., and it should spread. Now, at this time, of course, we're talking about 1800, and that is when there were still European colonial powers in the United States, specifically France and Spain. We'd already gotten our independence from Great Britain. So France and Spain were still held, like Louisiana and California and Texas. So it was kind of going to start problems because a lot of people were encroaching on other colonies other than land that was owned by the United States. So let's see. Therefore, the United States had both a right and a duty to spread out across the entire continent. This is basically, if I had to characterize it, was all part of American exceptionalism. We had the best government, we had the best economy, and things of that nature, so we were going to prove it. And we're going to prove it by coming into other people's land and basically encroaching on it. I'm not going to say it was a bad thing, but I don't think the European powers could have maintained their distant empires like they should have with the United States expanding. American expansion was inevitable, necessary, and had been ordained by God. Well, is it ordained by God? Who's to know? People are just, you're making a claim like that. Do you, actually sit back? I mean, the country was expanding and we needed, living space. And that was the only way. And there were several things that occurred that actually brought to the forefront how the United States was able to expand so quickly. Manifest Destiny. Fulfilling this Manifest Destiny, many argued, would benefit everyone involved. American settlers would gain access to much needed land. The population of the United States was growing very quickly at this time. Through farming and construction, those settlers would improve the land, making it more productive, which would benefit society as a whole. Many Americans believed that native people who did not build permanent homes and who might not farm wasted the land. Well, that was not taking into consideration that Native Americans believed the land belonged to everybody, not just one singular type of person or one class of person. It belonged to everybody. Non-Europeans, especially Indians, would have the opportunity to learn the American way of life. Well, what if you didn't want to learn the American way of life? What if you wanted to preserve your culture? And it's kind of like a forced type of thing where, you look at it and you go, well, what right did we have to expand? I mean, the country wasn't even past the Appalachian Mountains, wasn't really ours. We hadn't undergone the Louisiana Purchase, which is mentioned in here. And the reason being is that we didn't know as a young country how far we were going to expand. So when we look at Manifest Destiny, was it a forced type of expansion, or was it one that, we must do this because God deemed it necessary? And what type of peoples are we going to get angry, who are going to get angry with us for doing it? So it was generally, manifest destiny means the westward expansion of the United States. Although the phrase was new, the idea was not. Even as British colonists, settlers pushed their geographic boundaries farther and farther west, always looking for new land and a better way of life. Thousands of Americans ignored the proclamation of 1763, which forbid settlement of the Ohio River Valley. Now, this was one of the things that went through in the Treaty of Paris of 1763 that ended the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War, however you look at it. And so people were defying this proclamation. They couldn't. They were told that they couldn't go any further, so they just they ignored it and did it anyway. The problem with that is that the government can't provide you protection. Well, after the Americans won their independence, there was a great movement to start claiming land that belonged to other people, and that's where the conflict comes in. This is a map of the territorial acquisitions. We got Florida, we got Louisiana in the Louisiana Purchase, and that was important for this factor, and that is that New Orleans was a port city, and everything that came to the interior of the nation went out through New Orleans to go to Europe. See, it comes through here and then out through the Caribbean into the Atlantic. So we needed New Orleans in order for the interior of the nation to prosper. Also, we see Mexican Cession, and then the Texas. That was after the Battle of the Alamo, and then the Gadsden Purchase down here. How does this painting explain the attitude of Americans in the Midwest? Kind of like divinely inspired, and like it said earlier, God deemed this inevitable. We have to do this. So they went out, and this painting was it's known as the Spirit of the Frontier, American Progress in 1872 by John Gast. So it was very, very telling that they believed that it was a divine intervention to expand the United States more westward. Why did early settlers flood across the country during the mid-1800s? Well, in 1849, there was some gold discovered in California, and that's known as the Gold Rush. That's why you have the San Francisco 49ers, because they're named after that, the 49. It was 1849. And there was fertile land for farming, especially in the Oregon Territory. Not only there, but across the plains. There was a lot of wild animals that we had never seen before. May have the buffalo and certain other animals, and it was great for hunters to go out there and do this. Ranchers could raise cattle descended from Spanish herds in areas buffalo previously inhabited, and we start to see bigger cows, bigger bulls, which means more meat. All right, and they could graze out there without any problems. There was plenty of land out there. It was just a matter of getting to it first, and the United States was determined to get to it first. This generally shows you a map of Western migration, where people started from and the main roads to get there. This is also before Lewis and Clark went to explore the Pacific Northwest after the Louisiana Purchase. They were given a specific mission to do this, is go out there and look at it. So these are the various trails in which people actually decided that they were going to use to get to the West. It was a long and arduous journey, by the way. We talked about the Conestoga wagon. That was one thing that was used. And it took its toll on people. It really did, because when you're traveling for months at a time and you haven't reached your destination, you start to get a little bit discouraged about it. So these trails were basically set up so that people could take those trails and they could go out west and they could settle into the western areas. Again, here we come up with the Conestoga wagon, which was known as the Prairie Schooner. The wagons were named for the Pennsylvania town where many were built, Conestoga, Pennsylvania. Oxen or mules usually pulled these wagons in traveling groups called wagon trains. They got the nickname Prairie Schooner because of their ship-like appearance moving across the grassy plains. Now, not only this is like an early 19th century RV, okay? You live in it, you sleep in it, you eat from it, contained kitchens, country kitchens. What do you do with the children? Well, do they get educated while they're in this trail? Now, a lot of times, if you notice these wagons, if you notice the wheels right here, they are wooden wheels, and these wooden wheels used to crack very easily. So a lot of times wagons would get, and then you had to unload the wagon to lift everything up to change the wheels. So it's very time consuming to travel to the west. The train wagon was shorter, lighter, and easier to navigate than the Conestoga, had a watertight bonnet, and slanted side rails helped to keep the rain out. Why might pioneers travel in large groups as shown in this painting? Well, I can tell you there's safety in numbers. You know, you have Indians out there. You have the dangers of climate. It used to get very, very cold. So when you travel out there and it gets very, very cold, generally there's warmth in numbers, and there's also safety in numbers as well. And that's why people organized these wagon trains to head out west, because it was safer that way than just traveling by yourself. You're left to the elements if you travel by yourself. That's why they had these large groups. Now, there was the stagecoach that came into play here. There were passenger coaches, were a popular form of public transportation in the early 1800s. It was almost like catching a bus to go somewhere. They got their name because the coach driver changed horses every 15 miles, or stage. And you have to change horses because the horses get worn out. The person who rode next to the driver usually carried a shotgun to guard against hostile American Indians or bandits, plus thus the phrase riding shotgun. When people go, I call shotgun, well, that's because the person that was assisting the driver used to carry a shotgun. These stages were not very big. They could probably fit about 6 people in them. There was enough room for baggage on the top of the stagecoach. They were very didn't have a lot of shock absorbers in them, so it was kind of a rough ride. And it was one way to travel, in other words. The steam locomotive. The locomotive first saw its invention. The first railway line was actually in England in the 1830s. The first locomotive built in the United States was the Best Friend of Charleston. It began service in 1930, and they weren't that fast. They were not very, very quick. July 1st, 1862, President Lincoln signed the Pacific Railroad Act, which called for the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. The tracks were completed in Promontory, Utah on May 10th, 1869. And the tracks met, and there was a ceremony there. One of the things about locomotives, and one of the things I think I need to stress, is that every invention has a military application. For instance, the telegraph was used to send back information from the battlefront. The locomotive was used to bring troops closer to the front and quicker to the front in that manner. And that's why a lot of these inventions, like I said, had military applications, because they do, and the military generally takes them over within the early stages. The sectional view of a locomotive, if you look here, is called the firebox. It heats the steam that runs the pistons. There's a brass cylinder or a piston here. These are the drive wheels, and the excess steam is let out from the burning from the coal or the wood comes out through here, which is a smokestack. It was not very quick. It was kind of slow at first until people actually understood, how it works. How do we make it go faster? Sometimes these steam engines would explode if you put too much pressure on them. So that was one danger that was incurred. The steamboat was another way of traveling. New Orleans had a lot of steamboats in the what I call the antebellum period, which was before the Civil War, around the turn of the century. Robert Fulton built the first successful steamboat, the Clermont, in 1807. So now we're talking about the country is very, very early on here in its development, and this gentleman, Robert Fulton, builds a steamboat that the pistons and the turbine, well, the pistons are run by steam. A lot of times, if a boiler overheats, it's going to explode as well. That happened right after the Civil War on the Sultana. They called it the Titanic of the Mississippi River. Troops going home from the war, and it exploded and killed a lot of them, burned a lot of them to death as well. Settlers who traveled west by ship faced an arduous journey of 18,000 miles around South America, or sailed to the Isthmus of Panama, crossed overland to the Pacific Ocean, and then sailed to California. Well, the thing about Panama is there was no canal there yet. The canal would not be built until 1914, wouldn't be finished until 1914, started under Teddy Roosevelt, because he pushed that, we need a canal, we need some sort of outlet to where ships can go through, to where they don't have to go all the way around South America to get to the West Coast. The fastest way actually was by coach at that time, and then a little bit further on, when the railroads met, was through railroads to get there quicker. And it was a great. Now, when you go through the Isthmus of Panama, they had to walk across it, of course, or take a coach across it to get to the other side. If you look at a map, and then get on a ship and go to California. So it was a very arduous journey, a very long journey. Most of us complain when we have to go across town. Imagine traveling 18,000 miles. That's a long trip, very long trip. Go west, young man, Horace Greeley said in 1845. He was a newspaper man. To encourage settlement, Congress passed the Homestead Act of 1862. Any adult citizen, including freed slaves who had never taken up arms against the Union, could claim 160 acres of public land. But in order to get the title, they had to do these two things: make improvements, build a house, and cultivate the land, or live there for 5 years. There was one up here I wanted to see, told of what was involved in Manifest Destiny. Oh, yeah, here we go. Examples of American expansion. The Northwest Ordinance in 1787 reverses the terms of the Proclamation of 1763, which said people couldn't go past the Appalachians into the Ohio River Valley. The Louisiana Purchase doubles the size of the U.S. territory. Now, the reason that this came to fruition is that Napoleon, who was the emperor, who had crowned himself emperor of France at the time, needed money for military campaigns and sought the sale of Louisiana his best bet to do it. And that's what he did. And we bought it for $15 million, which back then was a high sum. But for the amount of land that we got, the Louisiana Purchase, the land there, later became part of 15 states within the United States. The War of 1812 had designs on Canada and Florida. We wanted to get Florida. We wanted to get Canada. And the Monroe Doctrine of 1823 specifically stated, it was written by James Monroe, the president then, specifically stated that the United States would not tolerate any further European incursions into the Western Hemisphere. And if it did, we could use military force. The Indian Removal Act, the Trail of Tears, 1838, we talked about that in the last lecture, was these Indians who were removed from their land so that ordinary people could get to the land in order to sell it. It was basically thought of as Andrew Jackson's way of getting rid of the Indians and giving his friends some of this land. The Texas Revolution was very important. 1836, the Battle of the Alamo, Goliad, where was it? San Jacinto. All of these were important to defeat a Mexican dictator by the name of Generalissimo Antonio de Santa Anna. And he was like I said, they called him Napoleon of the West. And he was a dictator. And you had a lot of people from America, from the United States, moving to Texas to cultivate the land. And of course, they wanted to form their own state, and they became a republic, Texas Republic. It was actually a republic within the United States. And later on, they became a state when the United States annexed them in 1847. There was a Mexican War where President James K. Polk used the border dispute to justify expansion, and that was expansion into Arizona, New Mexico, and southern parts of California. And he used it as an excuse. We defeated the Mexican army under, again, Generalissimo Antonio de Santa Anna, and we actually, that's why we started the war, was to gain access to the land. The Mexican Cession of 1848, California, Nevada, New Mexico, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and Arizona, we paid $15 million for that. The Gadsden Purchase in 1853 from Mexico was $10 million, and it wasn't that big. I'm going to show you a map how big the Gadsden Purchase was. There was a purchase of Alaska from 1867 from Russia for $7.2 million. Now, these are just examples of American expansion. And in the Spanish-American War, we got Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Now, if you look at this map, you'll see the Gadsden Purchase was not as large as the Mexican Cession, okay? But people seem to think it was worth it because of the simple fact that it gained more land. The United States could actually expand more comfortably, and it was a way to kind of neutralize Mexico. Okay, we'll pay them for the land because they'd been a thorn in the side of the United States for a long time. And in the early 20th century, they would become a thorn in the side of the United States. The significance of the frontier is that as the 1800s ended, the United States occupied the North American continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. In 1893, Frederick Jackson Turner wrote a thesis, a paper that he presented at the World's Fair, the World Exposition in Chicago in 1893, where he proposed the frontier thesis, which meant that the frontier experience had shaped the character of America and its people, which I kind of tend to agree with, because it not only was the melting pot moving away from the urban areas, it was moving into the country as well. The frontier was the source of America's economic and political power. Well, the problem here is that when the nation expanded and as new territories wanted to become states, the question of slavery came up. Do we admit this state as a slave state or a free state? And in order to maintain a particular balance of power in Congress, whenever a slave state came in, a free state had to be admitted. This is Jackson Turner's thesis was after the Civil War and the loss of the Confederacy, but it still maintained that the West defined the character of American culture. And in a sense it did, because there were still Spanish people in the territories. There were still French people in Louisiana, Creoles as we refer to them, and nobody's really come up with a proper definition of Creole. It's either someone who has a mixture of Spanish and African blood, or someone who is a descendant of the original settlers of the Louisiana colony. So we don't really have a proper definition of it. But it was a mixture of culture. It added to the fabric of the nation. That's why we became known as a melting pot. Okay, I'm going to leave a reading assignment on your on Moodle for you to read. Everybody have a safe and happy Thanksgiving. I'm not sure whether we have class. Well, I'll check and see and then make an announcement. But I just thought I'd wish you a happy Thanksgiving just in case. So I'll see you again either Wednesday or next week. Bye-bye for now.